Hello, Matteo here. This is the basic maintenance video. I will cover basic brake gear tuning, some seat adjustments, drivetrain maintenance, and anything else that comes to my mind. To begin, brakes, there are many different styles of brakes. One of the common styles that we find are called V-brakes. They look like this, but there would be a cable coming down, suspended between the two arms and clamped by this arm. The basic adjustments to know for V-brakes is that to center them left or right, they give you a Phillips head bolt. You can see right here. That hits against the spring that is coming up the back. Tightening it increases pressure on the spring, pulling it out towards you. So tightening pulls by increasing tension, and loosening releases tension and lets it go the other way. So if you have an issue of a brake pad rubbing on one side more than the other, either arm has that Phillips head or Allen key headed bolt from which you can tighten to pull or loosen to push. Tightening again increases tension. Thus, if you had an issue where it wasn't snappy feeling, you could tighten each bolt to increase the outward tension, the snappy feeling, and if it wasn't releasing from the rim, it's increasing that outward tension, so it would pull the brake pad away from the rim more quickly. So you have that. Aside from that, again, for increasing tension on this type of system, you'll see that there's this little pin right here, and then there's the Allen key that normally mounts it to your frame right there, mounts it to the post. That little pin, if you loosen the whole arm off of your post, depending on your frame, you'll have 3 little holes, and the pin is often tightened into the middle hole. You could put it to the top for more tension if you wanted more tension pulling it outward, the brake pads outward from the rim if it wasn't doing so as well. But the Phillips head tightening of the bolt is the same thing, it's just a little easier and quicker. So V-brakes, they're centering and increasing tension, side pull, dual pivot, brakes like this for road bikes. You will have a centering Allen key headed bolt at the top on many of them that will pivot it left to right and will also change its feeling from snappy to squishy, depending on which extreme you go to. You can also, when the nut is bolted on the other side of the frame, loosen that nut, compress the brake, keep it compressed, tighten up the nut, and then that will often center it all up for you. So there's centering brakes. For tightening brakes, use my kid's bike here. So these silver knobs, let me bring this a little closer for you. So these silver knobs, well, they come in many different colors. Barrel adjusters, in case you don't know how to use them. They're about a 3/4 inch long bolt, and as you counterclockwise turn the bolt, pulling it out, it increases tension, and the thinner diameter ring goes back clockwise to hold it and lock into that position. So that 3/4 inch degree, you can tighten your brakes. They will have them at the brake lever or in side pull. You'll see it here at the point in which the housing connects to the brake lever. For kids especially, it's good to know, see if I can get some good view on this, sorry it's a little dark. It's good for you to know this Phillips head bolt, where an Allen key headed bolt often is on brake levers. Tightening that in, or clockwise turning it, changes the neutral position of the lever closer to the handlebar for small hands. It will also change the feeling of the brake to be a bit more squishy if you overdo it. But it's a great way to allow the lever to have more reach. Other than that, gears will also have a barrel adjuster. As you see right here, this little knob comes in different shapes and sizes. If it's not at the shifter on the handlebars, then it will be at the derailleur. You can see the silver knob right there where the cable connects to the derailleur. Basically, the barrel adjuster there is just like the one for the brakes. Counterclockwise turning increases tension. If you want more tension, if you click into a gear and it doesn't fully go, if you click into an easier gear and it doesn't go into the easier gear it was supposed to go to, is making funny clicking sounds behind you, then if you've got it at the shifter, you can counterclockwise turn it while you're riding, increasing tension and pulling it up into that easier gear until you feel or hear that it goes into the gear it was destined to go to. And then vice versa for the opposite. If you go down into a harder gear and it's not going, you have too much tension, you need to release by clockwise turning the knob. If it's at your shifter on the handlebars, you can do so while riding. If it's not, you're going to have to do it at that barrel adjuster I showed you down at the derailleur while the bike is upside down and you're messing around with it. Other than that, the basic things to show you, I skipped disc brakes. So mechanical disc brakes. This one doesn't have a barrel adjuster coming into it, but this is where the rotor would go, and the cable would come into here. So you'll often have a barrel adjuster on these as well, from which you can counterclockwise turn to bring a pad in closer. Keep in mind that counterclockwise turning the barrel adjuster brings in the pad from the outside side of the caliper. So this would be away from the wheel, this would be into the wheel. So counterclockwise turning the knob will bring the mobile pad, that which is connected to this, in closer. The stationary pad normally has an Allen key on the inside side. Clockwise turning brings this stationary pad closer to the rotor. The stationary pad wants to be, stationary pad wants to be very close to the rotor. If it's too far, then the mobile pad is having to push your rotor to the stationary pad, then that's not good. You can potentially bend your rotor. Aside from that, it is good to know how to alleviate squeaking on both of these braking systems. So for a disc brake, a lot of contaminants can get into a rotor. It's not as hot as it is in a motorcycle or a car, where it's then burning off through friction all the contaminants that can get on the rotor. On a bicycle, it doesn't do that, so it's prone to squeaking. Getting alcohol and a fresh J-cloth, those blue and white checkered kitchen cloths, wiping down the rotor, cleaning inside the whole system around where the brake pads are. And also you can check out the brake pads of your rotor if you're seeing, of your caliper. If you're seeing that the brake pads are glossy and shiny, you might want to try scuffing them up. And they may be contaminated, just need to be replaced. For disc brakes, that's how to get rid of squeaks. It's much more common in hydraulic disc brakes, they're very strong. And in V-brakes, such as this, is also very common. The front of the bike is closest to the camera. The way that you would alleviate a squeak on these is you can give a slight angle to the brake pad by, it's called towing the brake pad. You would angle the half of the brake pad that is closest to the front of the bike in towards the rim. A small degree, some people will just use a penny by putting a penny in between the brake pad and the rim on the back side of the brake pad, and then that thus angles the brake pads in just a little bit. It will change the feeling of the brakes, will make it a bit more spongy if you overdo it, but it will help get rid of squeaking. You can also try scuffing up the brake pad with a file. If your brake pads are so worn that you don't see these divots of indentation, and they give you that wear line. If you've reached that wear line, it's one flat, flush surface, and it's a time to swap the brake pads out. Aside from that, some basic things to know would be for oiling. Many people know that chains love oil. Unfortunately, most people do the counterintuitive thing and over oil. When you oil the chain, if you put too much, then the chain will accumulate this oil as a sludge that will often appear on the jockey wheels of your derailleur. So it'll build up in this wheel and on the other wheel. So when that sludge accumulates, it picks up sediment from the concrete, the road, which then grinds down the metal of your moving parts, such as your chain, And then once the chain is worn out, then it'll wear down the teeth of the rear gear cluster first, and then over time the front cog, which will cost you more money in replacing parts. It's best practice to avoid wearing these things down, but when the chain wears down, you can replace the chain first to avoid having to replace the rear gear cluster. You can normally get 2 chains replaced out of 1 rear gear cluster before you then have to replace the rear gear cluster. And then you're trying to save the teeth of the front crank, which wear down the slowest. That was a little off topic from the oiling, though. To finish up the oiling, basically, over-oiling can wear down the chain. To not over-oil, you want to drip the oil along the chain and then grab the chain with a rag, wiping off all the oil until the chain looks dry. The oil only exists to lubricate between the small little moving parts of the chain. When it's on the exterior of the chain is when it's going to do you a disservice. Aside from that, not everyone knows, I should have picked up the camera and put it away. Not everyone knows the basic means in which to adjust a seat for your comfort. It is good to know that seats, whether it's an Allen key underneath the seat or it's 2 nuts on the side, they can be loosened up to allow you to change the angle of the seat up and down, as well as moving the seat forward and back. You'll see on the rungs of my seat up over here that it is very long. You can get seats with very long rungs so that you have more adjustability forward and back. Normally the most comfortable position for a seat is for it to be horizontal. That is pretty much it for adjustability. I mean, you can raise your stem with adapters. For threadless systems and for threaded systems, you can just pull it up. Yes, the other maintenance things I wanted to go over for tires. So tires left over winter won't always completely deflate to the point of the rubber folding, but if they do and you notice the rubber is sitting in a compressed position, then the rubber will crack along the seam of that fold and it'll ruin the rubber of the tire. So if you have a tire that's deflating that much, you might have a slow leak, but it can be completely normal as well, just depending on how tight your valve is. You would either want to inflate and keep it pumped up over winter, or you could leave the bike hanging or upside down so it didn't compress the rubber of the tire. Aside from that, it's good to be in the habit of once in a while, just periodically looking through the tread of the tire and picking out any glass. A piece of glass could be inoffensive until you hit something hard enough and it drives the glass into your inner tube. Keeping your tubes properly inflated every 2 to 3 weeks, at least every month. Pumping it up to the proper PSI, which is depicted on the rubber on the side of the tire. There's many metrics for measuring pressure. The ones we use in Canada are the PSI, or the pounds per square inch. It will give a minimum and a maximum. The older the tire, the more you want to be easy on going and pumping it up to that maximum. Normally 10 below is good enough.